I'm going to talk about a tool called front of the room and back of the room leaders. Leaders can be effective both by being in the front of the room and by being in the back of the room. In fact, most leaders have a natural tendency to be in one end of the room. That's where their natural style resides. Now, not that they don't get to the other side of the room, they do, but they naturally operate from either the front of the room or the back of the room. Let me distinguish the two styles. A front of the room leader is somebody who is very comfortable being in the front of the room, physically in the front of the room, very comfortable standing up and talking about themselves and their convictions, very convicted about what they talk about, usually with significant passion, demonstrated in an exuberant way, and never shies away from an opportunity to do so. In contrast, back of the room leaders are more comfortable kind of sitting in the back and listening, and occasionally saying something. They are often soft spoken or mild mannered. They are often very quiet, but when they speak, everybody figures out, everybody listens. They occasionally come to the front of the room, but they only do so if the circumstance demands it. They voice their opinion only when it is appropriate, usually when asked or when it is absolutely necessary to share their opinion. Both of these two styles of leadership are just fine. Now, think back, think about, if you just randomly think of a few leaders, the chances are more of your list is going to represent front of the room leaders than back of the room leaders. We tend to not think about back of the room leaders as frequently. In fact, I would venture to say that at least in the Western world, we glorify the front of the room leader. We do not put the back of the room leader in the same, at the same level, on the same pedestal that we put the front of the room leaders. Not that the front of the room leaders are more effective, by the way. Back of the room leaders are just as effective. But we, at least in the Western world, seem to glorify the front of the room leaders. So as a result, in our mind, in our memory, we hold imagery of front of the room leaders more actively than we do so of back of the room leaders. Let me give you some examples of back of the room leaders. Ben Franklin was a back of the room leader, quietly influenced a significant fraction of the thoughts of his day. From where I come from, Mahatma Gandhi was a fantastic back of the room leader. Seldom spoke, and when he did, everybody listened. I worked at a company called Tektronix for many years. The person who founded Tektronix, Howard Vollum, a great leader, back of the room leader. He was a very quiet man, but when you start talking about the electronic instruments he was really passionate about, he could share all the opinions that he had with you. There are Bill Gates, for example. Bill Gates, in many ways, is a back of the room leader, in contrast to, say, Steve Jobs, who is a very front of the room leader. Bill Gates gets to the front of the room when appropriate, when asked to, when needed, but typically operates from the back of the room. Again, there is nothing right or wrong, good or bad, better or worse of either one of the two categories. And neither one, by the way, stays exclusively at the front or the back of the room. A front of the room leader has to know when to move away from the front and go to the back of the room and be a back of the room leader. Back of the room leader has to know when it's appropriate to come to the front of the room and take charge. Ask yourself, what kind of a leader are you? Most of us have a natural tendency. Don't try to camouflage the tendency. Don't try to change that natural behavior, because that's who you are. But accept the fact that that's the way you operate, but also there are circumstances in your own life, in your own leadership, where you must operate the other way. And in those occasions, actively become a slightly different kind of a leader for that instance, for that purpose. In fact, If you are a back of the room leader, in a different tool that I talk about called intensity of presence, you will notice that when you have a higher power of authority, front of the room leaders who typically have a higher intensity of presence can become very intimidating. So if you are a back of the room leader, it actually serves you very well as you grow in your leadership capabilities, as you grow in your responsibilities, and you have higher powers of authority. You become a very effective back of the room leader. Do not change the fundamental style of your leadership. Acknowledge it, accept it, perfect it, and complement it with whenever the other style is called for. Front of the room and back of the room leaders. So not only is this concept important for you to understand what kind of a leader you are, but this concept is also important as it relates to the other leaders around you. As a leader, it is your responsibility to get the best of all the leaders that are around you. Now, some of those leaders will be front of the room leaders. Some of them will be back of the room leaders. Depending on what kind of a leader you are, you, by understanding what the other people are like, you can complement their strengths to fulfill your own spectrum in an adequate way. You can also be intentional and give space in the front of the room for other front of the room leaders. Encourage back of the room leaders to go to the front of the room. So just being conscious and intentional about what kind of a leader you are and being conscious about what kind of a leader others are, you can intentionally cause everybody to become a more well-rounded leader.